Okay, I intend to record a video to present my current view of the totality, and there will be 5 main documents. My current view of nature, mostly physics, chemistry, biology. My view of what can be called spirit, or the realm of human consciousness and human interactions. So the full view of a society in a simplified way. My full view of ethics, and my view of the movement of ideas, predominantly in the early 21st century Western world. I will not comment thoroughly, but I will just show the documents and briefly comment. Yeah. So I wrote a few notes. So I will partly read some of the things that I wrote and partly comment normally. So here's the introduction. A question? No. First, yeah, I will try to share the simplified view of the totality in the shortest amount of space and time, one might say. So in a way, that's the map of the whole universe. But what is lacking, what I will not show in this video, is the view, my view on metaphysics, which includes ontology, of which mathematics is a part, metaphysics as such, logic and epistemology. So I will not show this, but other than that, there will be nature and what can be called spirit and ethics as well. Yeah. A brief comment about knowledge. My view is that the truth is the whole, the totality. So in order for knowledge or for science to be true, there has to be unity, completeness, determinacy, which means all the parts of the totality have to be distinguished. There has to be interrelatedness. All the parts have to be interrelated and interconnected in a way. Yeah, so unity, completeness, determinacy, interrelatedness, and obviously internal coherence, etc., etc. But these are the 4 fundamental determination. It has to be true, of course, and also we can envision, which I will not do in these documents, but to show the genesis of the categories, how they emerge from previous categories, so how they come into being in a way. But here that's really more difficult. It's just, what I will show is just my current view as I record this, as I'm starting to record this. We are the 4th of October 2023. I am a process. My worldview adapts, changes, evolves daily. I improve constantly on various levels. So it's far from being perfect, but at this moment in time, this is how I envision this. Yeah. I wrote, in order to think intelligently and rigorously about any topic eventually, one has to think about the interconnectedness of all fields of science, or all layers of being. Yeah. So it is important to grasp each notion or each concept in ordinary language in isolation, namely to understand what each concept in each field, what it means, what it refers to. But it's also important to grasp the connection, the relation with other notions. Yeah. And here I will briefly. This book is really excellent, How to Read a Book, by Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren. How to Read a Book, the Classical Guide to Intelligent Reading. There are excellent pieces of advice in this book, but one of them consists in advising readers when reading a book to look for the important words used by the author, and through them to come to terms with the author, namely to focus and to pay attention to the words used by an author, and then to try to grasp the meaning that the author attaches to this word. And that's what Mortimer J. Adler calls a term. Namely, a term is a word with a given, specified, and specific meaning. Yeah. And when you do this, you are then able to carry concepts from one book to another, from one field of knowledge to another. So you become richer in a way, because if you read thoroughly, with attention, with focus, with dedication, with effort, if you pay attention to the words and the terms, you are capable of using them, the words and the terms of one field of knowledge, to enrich, to improve your view on other fields. Yeah, so that's important, and in a way that's what I've been trying to do, is to list, to categorize the most important concepts in ordinary language, the most important terms or notions or categories in the field of the natural sciences, the social sciences, ethics, and in the movement of ideas. Yeah. And about abstraction and mediation, I wrote, words can be envisioned as sounds, when these are spoken words, sounds which refer to entities, to reality, but we are never sure that the meaning behind a given word used by an author is the same as the one that we have in mind when we use the word, or when we hear the word. So that's what coming to terms mean, is to make an effort in communication to understand and or to communicate, to make sure, or at least to make an effort to try to improve the odds of clear communication, that certain words are used with a specific meaning, and one has to make efforts to be sure that the other understands the meaning of the word that we use, or to make an effort to try to understand the meaning that the other, the person who communicates, either through the written word or orally, through the spoken word, that to understand what they mean before trying to decide whether a sentence or a thesis is true or false, or interesting or not. One has first to try to understand the words which are used, and then the propositions which are made. Yeah, so it's a simple piece of advice, but it's really an excellent one, really, to pay a lot of attention to the words and the meaning that they have. And about abstraction and mediation, abstraction is negative if it is not mediated, namely if the words which are used are not mediated, if they are not embodied in a way, partly, there is the risk that what can be called verbalism, namely just empty talk, if what the words that are used in a communication are what they refer to, if it is not specified, if it is not clarified, there is a risk that empty words be spoken, and it gives room for babbling, empty talk, rhetoric, manipulation, etc., etc. That's why it's important to ask the question, what do people mean when they use such or such word? For example, the word nature, what do people have in mind? What do they mean when they use the word nature? Or the word ethics? Or the word, I don't know, society, or people, or the name of any country? What do they mean? To try to clarify this can help avoid a lot of misunderstandings. And finally, to conclude, a question that I ask myself often is, who knows what? We live in the 21st century in an interconnected global village through means of communication. People from all over the world can share and access information from all over the world. And the world is one interconnected totality. And there are a lot of people who speak publicly, but who knows what? What do the people who speak publicly, what do they know? And when they speak, where do they speak from in terms of knowledge? So what I try to promote with the documents that I will share, and which can be improved, but greatly improved, but what I try to share is a new way of communicating in a way. I will show what I understand or how I envision the world in a simplified way at this moment in time. So I'm not saying that what I show or what I say is necessarily true, but I show how I envision the world. So what, in a simplified way, what I know, or at least how I envision the world, so that those who might be interested in trying to understand what I communicate, at least they will know how they will have a clear view, or the clearest view possible, of my current worldview and how I envision the world, in order to put context to my words in a way. Yeah. Okay. I wrote also, I'm well aware that my current view is imperfect, but I try to act like a Keynesian, namely, when I listen to people talk publicly, or when I read what they write in articles or books, I would like to know precisely who knows what. It would be greatly enlightening to know what are the views on the philosophy of nature, the views on ethics, the views on the whole of society of public figures, intellectuals, journalists, content creators, etc., if they could summarize in a short amount of space, in a simplified way, in a formal way, but in a complete way nonetheless, their full worldview, it would help a great deal. And so that's why I intend to do, I've already done this, but here I try to show really the full view, so that at least people who watch this, when they do, they will be able to envision how I see the world. It's a simplification, but at least I would like to promote and to benefit from clearer communications. So I do my part. Oh yeah, I wrote, I partly share my own ignorance, because there are a lot of things that I don't know, but I know that I don't know. These are known unknowns, one might say. I'm a process, I improve constantly. It can be greatly improved, but yeah, this is my current worldview that I've been able to build with the circumstances that I have encountered. So given the circumstances, this is the best that I've been able to produce in terms of the balance between complexity, accessibility, simplicity, intelligibility. Yeah. The idea of the documents is to have and to share a full, accessible, intelligible view of the totality in the shortest amount of space possible. Yeah. Okay. So now I will show the first document about nature. Okay. So, hopefully we see. This is a representation, a very simplified, but I've tried to make it complete in a very limiting amount of space. That's my current view of physics and chemistry. So the documents about nature, there are two of them. The first one is this one. I have tried to gather the whole of physics and chemistry in a very short amount of space. It's very dense, yeah. And the second about nature will be the whole of biology. I will not thoroughly comment. Maybe I will do this probably in another video at some moment, but I just briefly comment the main ideas in ordinary sense. In red, we have the main fields of modern physics, namely mechanics, thermodynamics, electromagnetism, optics, chemistry, which is distinct from physics, but it's in the continuity nonetheless. And we have also quantum physics and relativity. And at the top, we have life, which is the transition towards biology. So we have relativity, quantum physics, and classical physics, which includes the domains or the topics in the center: mechanics, thermodynamics, electromagnetism, optics. And this is a division of modern physics in a way. In orange, we have, in the middle, we have the fundamental forces, namely gravitation, when it is considered as a force, the electromagnetic force, and the strong and weak interactions, or the strong and weak forces. In green, we have key elements of the universe, one might say. So the key element, it's not an element as such, but the key the determination of physics would be motion and energy, which is the ability or the potential to bring about movement and motion. And other than that, we have at the bottom space, matter, and time, which are often envisioned as being the fundamental constituents of the universe. It can be envisioned as distance, time, and mass. Yeah. And we also have force, acceleration, and mass, which are key elements in mechanics. Heat, temperature, energy, power, work, entropy, which are key constituents of thermodynamics. There is sound as well in acoustics. Charge, wave, field, electricity, magnetism, light, which are key elements. Here, element is in ordinary language, it's not a technical word, of key elements of electromagnetism and or optics, and chemical reaction for chemistry. Yeah. There are the constants, that's H, G, and C. Planck's constant in quantum physics, the speed of light in a vacuum for relativity, and the gravitational constant for gravitation, and finally the characteristics of particles, namely the mass, the charge, and the spin. That's in the bottom left corner. Yeah, and other than that, I have tried to put the greatest amount of really important determinations or aspects or concepts in ordinary language in a limited amount of space. So the idea of the document, simplified, on the left side, from bottom up, the logic is from microscopic to macroscopic, so from particles to molecules, particles, atoms, molecules. On the right side, from bottom up, that's kind of the opposite. On the right, it's from macroscopic to microscopic, namely the cosmos as a whole, the solar system, and the Earth. So that's UPS, Universal Particular Singular. And below, at the bottom, from left to right, just at the bottom, it's from microscopic, namely quantum physics, to macroscopic, namely general relativity. Yeah, that's the idea. The division of nature from a philosophical perspective, a division between mechanism, chemism, and organism. So mechanism means to be set into motion by an other. Chemism means to be transformed by another and to transform another as well. And organism, which is a higher stage, means self-movement, purposeful movement. Yeah. And also an underlying idea that we find not only in physics but in the whole natural but also social world is that an underlying notion in mechanics is the center. Objects are attracted by their center in a way. Gravitation, free fall, it's a fall towards the center. The notion in thermodynamics, the underlying notion is equilibrium. Thermodynamic systems, they seek, one might say, to reach an equilibrium. In electricity and chemistry, there's a search for neutrality, to bring electric neutrality and balance. In life, precisely in biology, the underlying notion is the search for balance through homeostasis, namely to maintain harmony and balance and equilibrium in a way within the organism. And in the social world, that could be harmony, the search for social, political, aesthetic harmony. So the pervading idea of the universe, one might say, is a search for the center, equilibrium, neutrality, balance, harmony. Yeah. It can be envisioned like this. Yeah. And here I will not comment thoroughly, that's not the purpose to comment thoroughly this view of nature, but to simplify, one could say that in order to understand what nature, here it's just physics and chemistry, is all about, at least the fundamental determinations ought to be understood. A force, acceleration, mass, temperature, heat, entropy, etc., energy, electricity, charge, etc. All the categories which appear on this document, and there are many more. I could have, precisely, I could not have added many more because there wasn't enough room. But most, if not all, the categories which appear here are important. There are others that I have not been able to situate on the document, or there was not enough room, so I tried to read the most important as I envision this with my limited knowledge of physics as an empirical individual. But an educated person ought to be able to understand at least the fundamental determination, and to be able to understand also the interconnectedness. For instance, the transition between mechanics and the theory of heat, and that's thermodynamics, the relationship between quantum physics and chemistry, etc., etc. Yeah, I will not comment the specific aspect of the document, but I just share this full view of physics in the broadest sense. And I briefly wrote references in the realm of Naturphilosophie that I can list. There are many others, but important ones are some of the pre-Socratics, Plato in the Timaeus, for instance, the Dialogue of the Timaeus. There are Renaissance esoteric thinker who envision nature as an emblem book. The alchemist, the hermeticist, etc., etc. Schelling in the early 19th century, Hegel, Whitehead in the 20th century, and in the modern world, Matthew Siegel, who wrote great books about Whitehead and about the philosophy of nature. And this is what I show here. It's what one might call a verstandisch view of physics. It's derived mostly from a textbook on physics, but the verstandisch view, namely the abstract, rationalistic in the modern sense, scientific in ordinary sense, view of the natural world has to be incorporated in a philosophical view of nature, in an organic view of nature. So the modern view of the physicist is lacking. It is correct, but it is lacking. It's kind of empty philosophically, but a philosophical view ought not to reject modern science, but to incorporate this, but to go even further. That's in a way what Whitehead did. He had the training of a physicist and a mathematician, but he adopted a theological, philosophical perspective on nature, which incorporated the latest findings and discoveries of modern science. That's the ideal of Naturphilosophie, the philosophy of nature, namely to have an organic view of nature, which is opposed to the modern mechanistic view of physicists, of most of them at least, but to incorporate the latest findings in quantum physics, cosmology, etc., to incorporate them nonetheless. Yeah, I wrote, this is a self-made map. For me, it's a compass. Of course, it can be greatly improved. I'm not an expert in physics, but it has helped me a lot, because when I read books about physics now, I can try to situate what the author talks about and try to interconnect. It's very useful. So yeah, that's what I could say. Now I will show the second document about nature. Okay, this is how I envision the realm of biology. So that's in the continuity of physics and chemistry. Again, I have tried to put the greatest amount of important determinations or concepts or categories in the shortest amount of space. It has been difficult, but yeah, I'm not an expert neither in physics nor chemistry nor biology. I am self-taught, but it helps me, again, like the previous one, to see the full picture. So here it's a little bit more simplified. We have in red the three domains of life as envisioned by modern biologists: eukaryota, archaea, and bacteria. And in orange, we have the main kingdoms: fungi, plants, and animals, and also protists, which, as far as I know, are not always considered as a specific kingdom, but yeah. So the structure, it's from bottom up, from the microscopic to the macroscopic, or from simplicity, or rather simplicity, to more complexity. But actually the cell and the organism presuppose the previous layers. In a way, the previous layers, so biochemistry, the molecules of life, genetics, etc., they converge, that's a way of talking, towards the cell as their purpose. That's a teleological view. And from left and right, on the level of the environment and evolution, precisely I put evolution, which in a way pervades the entire biological world, one might say, and the environment as well, because organisms have to adapt and to interact with their environment. So evolution and environment, they take a limited amount of space on the document, but actually they pervade the entire realm of biology. But for purposes of space limitation, I had to put this in this perspective. Again, it is a map which helps a lot in visualizing the whole. And I wrote about ideas. An idea in German metaphysics is a principle which organizes, structures, and orders a totality. And life, precisely, can be envisioned as an illustration of an idea, because it is a spontaneously self-organizing totality, as opposed to a dead, externally imposed, top-down planning. Life, an organism, is that which emerges and organizes itself spontaneously from bottom up, one might say. And in German metaphysics, this is precisely what an idea is: a self-organizing totality. I wrote most of the key notions are present, not all of them obviously, because I haven't had the opportunity to read a lot of books about biology, and also because of space limitation. But this document can help think metaphorically, because linking various fields of knowledge can help clarify, illustrate, make a point, etc. For instance, here we have plants with roots, seeds, the stem, flowers, fruits, etc., etc. This is a type of metaphor which is the tree metaphor is very often used for an individual. For instance, I will precisely reuse this as a metaphor in the realm of ethics. An individual can be envisioned as a seed which has to develop, to find nutrients by planting roots in a tradition, and to grow, to develop a trunk or a stem, branches, leaves, to take energy from the nutrients in the soil, but also from the sun, to be pollinated, I don't know, but to develop eventually flowers and a fruit. So the metaphor of the tree or of the plant or of the flower with that of the individual who has to develop ethically and intellectually. It was already used by the German metaphysician. It can help a lot. It's a type of metaphor, so that just to illustrate the interconnectedness of all layers. I wrote, understanding life chemically or mechanistically, in a way, is a verständisch view, namely it is accurate. Life can be understood from a strictly biochemical standpoint. It's accurate in a way, but it is false philosophically, like in physics previously. This verständisch view, namely this modern rationalistic scientific view, is a moment in the process of acquiring knowledge, but it has to be aufgehoben, namely it has to be preserved while being negated. And the problem of modern science, in physics as in biology, is that the physicists and the biologists, they try to understand nature mechanistically, which is very often accurate on a lot of phenomena, but they completely miss the point because they do not think teleologically. They do not see the purpose, the intent, because they are atheist or materialist. They do not see the aim which is aimed at precisely. They do not think in terms of aims and ends and intent and purpose and plan, or at least in terms of purposeful motion. Yeah. I wrote, the human brain can be envisioned as the pinnacle, the crowning achievement of nature. So, for instance, to envision nature as having the human mind, human consciousness as a goal, as a telos, it's a reverse way of thinking. The modern theory of evolution explained that basically there is emergence by accident. That's not the belief of all scientists, but a lot of them. But actually, to envision nature as aiming towards the human brain, it's in a way it's a theological view in a way, and the question of how consciousness emerges from nature is a question which is of high interest for a lot of physicists when they wander slightly towards philosophy. And one can say, in a vaguely philosophical perspective, that actually nature, and here that's connected with what I said in the introduction, when I use the word nature, this is what I showed previously and what I show here, so that's the totality. Nature has to be, that's an abstract word in a way. Words are abstract, but it's an abstraction which has to be mediated in order to be meaningful. So nature as the totality of physics, chemistry, and biology contemplates itself through human consciousness, because precisely through human consciousness and human self-consciousness, nature comes back into itself, becomes a mirror to itself in a way, and man is nature's self-consciousness. Man can be envisioned as being the voice of the stars, which is actually true even from a materialist perspective, because precisely the heavy atoms which compose organisms and cells, the molecules of life, they are made of heavy atoms which themselves were produced in the death of supernovae, or in the death of heavy stars, etc. In the nuclear core of stars and massive astrophysical objects. Yeah. So the atoms which were formed, created in a way, in the heart of stars, they have traveled, in a chronological perspective, they have traveled a lot, but eventually they have assembled themselves, they have coalesced and developed in more and more complex molecules, and eventually cells and organisms, and organs, and eventually highly developed, highly complex animals, and eventually humans who are capable of looking backward on their own evolutionary development from a biological but also cosmic perspective. And these atoms, through all the processes of change and evolution that they have gone through, they are still present in the brain of humans, and they have come to participate in a process of self-consciousness. So this view, Matthew Siegel talks about this. Fichte, in a different way, already talked about this at the end of the 18th century. Spinoza, in a way. There's a woman named Affected Collective who made videos who talked about this. That's a cosmotheist view, namely the idea that the cosmos, in a way, is divine through the self-consciousness that it acquires through the mediation of man. And man's consciousness has become a cosmic agent in a chronological perspective. Yeah. Okay, so that's what could briefly be said. Now I will show my view of Geist. Yeah. So here again, like the previous document, a reasonably educated person ought to be able to understand the meaning of each of all these categories, to know what they mean. Yeah, there are many more. I could have added many more, but precisely no, I couldn't because there was not enough room. But at least all these determinations, they have to be understood and interrelated. Yeah, they have to be understood in isolation, but also in their interconnectedness. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so here, sociobiology, in a way, is in the continuity of nature. Man as a biological creature becomes, in a way, a social being. So like biochemistry was in the continuity with physics and chemistry, sociobiology, which is the foundation, in a way, of human social interactions, is in the continuity of nature. Yeah. And here, that's how I envision this, the full view of a society. I have already commented this document, but I will not thoroughly comment like the previous ones. I will just briefly outline the main structure. The logical structure here is from top to bottom, from bottom up. We have subjective, objective, and absolute spirit. Spirit can be envisioned in this sense as human consciousness. The individual soul, to be the realm of psychology, can be envisioned as a singularization of the world soul, of the soul of nature. In the language of Spinoza, that's a mode of the substance. In green, so from sociobiology to praxeology, language and intelligence, we have partly natural determinations, namely that's subjective spirit, it's partly, it's man, partly as a natural and partly as a spiritual being, because anthropology, sociobiology, and demographics, these are strongly biologically influenced topics, but in a way they already contain, they already contain an aspect of social, spiritual, in a way, interactions. It is not pure biology, it is not pure sociology either, it's a unity of both, you know, it's in a transition, a logical transition, not a chronological, but a logical transition. And like in the previous document, each layer is contained in the subsequent one in a way which is aufgehoben, namely to be preserved and negated. We find determinations of sociobiology in individual psychology. We find determination of psychology in the doctrine of human action, how humans act and their behavior, etc. We find determination of intelligence and morality in law and order, in economics, etc., etc. All the layers are interconnected. And I wrote, human beings tend to objectivize the content of their soul and or of their mind in social institutions. They need to exteriorize the inner determination of the soul in a collective way. These are social institutions, and that would be the realm of objective spirit. So here, the transition would be the family and education, morality and culture. That would be the transition from the subjective to the objective. And the higher we elevate ourselves as represented on this document, the more objective the institutions are, the more abstract, in a way, in a good sense, they are. And the relationship, the higher we go, the more spiritual they are, because they are less dependent on natural ties of kinship and natural bonds. They are more spiritual. For instance, the state and the doctrine of rights, it's invisible in a sense that these are purely spiritual interactions. The doctrine of rights, it's a code of behavior for thinking agents, which are supposed to obey a certain set of common rules, and religion, morality, and rights or legislation. It is specifically human, because humans have the ability to think, to reflect, to think about what they do, how to behave, to interact in a spiritual way, namely in a thinking way with others, and they can rationally exchange ideas through language, through communication with other human beings, that which animals can't. Animals have no morality, no legislation, no conscious legislation. Animals, they obey the laws of nature like humans do, but they do not give themselves their own laws, and they are not conscious of the laws that they follow, like the sun, the moon, the planets. The movement of the celestial bodies obeys to laws, but the celestial bodies are not aware of the laws that they follow, whereas human beings, they can be unaware of a lot of laws which govern their behavior in the realm of sociobiology, anthropology, psychology, etc., or even economics, but at least in the realm of legislation, morality, manners, behaviors, religious behavior, etc., they can become aware of the guiding principles and the ethical code which guides their behavior, which makes them ethical agents and spiritual agents. Yeah. I wrote, so in a way, what is invisible, morality, the effects of morality are made visible, but a moral principle, it is invisible. It is spiritual, like a constitution. Of course, the constitution of a country can be visible because the document can be accessed, it's written, etc. There are buildings, institutional buildings, courts, parliaments, etc., etc., house of chambers, houses, etc., etc. But these are just receptacle of ideas. The idea, in a way, that's why there's sometimes a misunderstanding. The Constitution of the United States of America, but all constitution, it is not supposed to be a piece of paper. It's not supposed to be, of course, it has to be a written document, but a constitution lives in the heart and minds of its citizens. Like a code of morality, of course, it can be written on a piece of paper or on tablets of wood or marble or whatever, but it is supposed to be carried by acting agents in a way. Like the economy, in a way, it's a set of acting individuals and mediated by institutions, and there are buildings which are economic in a sense, like banks, central banks, the stock exchange, etc., etc. But the economy is just people acting. So in a way, it is everywhere, and it is actualized by those who act according to their own individual motives, improving their own well-being, the search for value, etc., etc. Like a set of rights. It is made present through the individuals who embody and who enact and who carry the ideas in a way. That's why the institutions of the economy, finance, law and order, the state, the government, etc., etc., or globalism, they can be seen when they are made manifest in buildings, but actually, this in a way, it's kind of irrelevant in a sense that the truth about legislation, about government, about the economy, etc., is in the mind of individual acting agents. Our sociobiology, demographics, anthropology, they are the most natural determinations. In the sense, they are the least spiritual. This explains why they are often held in such disdain in the modern West. It's because, in a way, they are the least spiritual. But, I wrote, however, these topics, as fields of scientific inquiry and theorizing, they are spiritual nonetheless. There can be great anthropological studies in sociobiology, demographics, etc. So that's the great paradox that this document can help clarify, is that in a way, in the modern West, the topics which are the most natural within the human sphere, one might say, they are held in kind of contempt and disdain. There are historical reasons, but And the reason why is simply because, from a logical standpoint, there are much higher topics in terms of spirituality, yeah, not in a mystical sense, but in the sense of man as a spiritual being, as a conscious being, as an acting and thinking being. Morality is superior to natural determination, precisely, like law and ethics and rights, etc. That's why the topics in green are often considered to be inferior, although language, it's kind of different because language is the expression of spirit in a way, but it's partly derived from a need to cooperate in really primitive condition, in the sense that almost, as far as all human groups which are modern humans, they have developed language, but not all of them have developed a system of government with separate institutions, a complex system of rights, a budget, etc., a political life mediated by institutions, etc. So that, in this sense, that's why it's lower, although language in a way pervades the entire human world, art, philosophy, religion, etc. But what I'm trying to express is that the lower layers on this document, they are in a way the least spiritual because they are the most natural, and they contain the least amount of independent thought. And here independent means independent from natural tendencies. But the problem is that by rejecting these topics and all forms of scientific rational discourse on these topics, the modern West rejects a form of spirituality, because science would be classified with philosophy, if it had to be classified, a sub-branch of philosophy. So that's one of the most, and probably the most spiritual activity of man, namely to think rationally, scientifically, rigorously, methodically about the whole universe. So science is a form of spirituality in a sense, because it contains an enormous amount of thought and intelligence and enlightenment. So yeah, that's the not the paradox, but the one of the problems of the modern West is that there is a rejection of rationality and science in realms which are considered to be lower, sociobiology in a broader sense. So there's a rejection of rationality. And here I think I give a satisfying explanation of why there can be collective self-blinding taboos, because in a way man wants to stand beyond nature. That's morality, precisely. That's a way of fulfilling one's own spiritual destiny, namely to elevate oneself above the merely biological, anthropological tendencies, in a sense of biological anthropology, to go beyond in a more refined, a more spiritual way of interacting with others. That's the reason why topics like economics or politics or rights are superior, and why they have a lot more, they are more respected and considered than sociobiological sciences in a broader sense. But that's, in a way, that's a wrong type of negation. The modern Western society, they want to negate biology by pretending that it does not exist and that it has no influence on sociology in a broader sense, namely on culture, morality, law and order, economics, politics, etc. The modern West officially pretends that biology has no influence whatsoever on sociology in the broadest sense. But in a way that's kind of regressive, because that's not a good negation. A good negation would be to acknowledge that biology plays an important role in shaping human behavior, but while also acknowledging that trying to transcend the mere biological determinism is good nonetheless. So that would be a mixture of right-wing common sense and clear-mindedness on certain topics, and also left-wing idealism in the good sense, namely really to attempt to transcend relationship between humans which are just or mostly based on biological tendency, like men versus women or the various ethnic groups, etc. That would be the ideal, to acknowledge the differences while acknowledging that transcending mere biological determinism is a good thing, because the more moral a person grows, the more this person is able to think about others as spiritual agents when they are capable of behaving as such, rather than just belonging to a sociobiological class in a way. Yeah. So I wrote to conclude about this. There are taboo topics in the modern 21st century Western world, namely sociobiology, demographics, anthropology, when it comes to race and gender, physiognomy, evolutionary psychology, and intelligence. These topics are considered to be taboo. I have explained, I think, in the simplest way possible, the reason why, but I also explained why it's kind of regressive to refuse to acknowledge the importance of these topics, and to refuse to shed the light of reason on these topics, because then it leads to an irrational society which pretends or deceives itself into believing that most of the topics in green, with maybe the exception of language, have no relevance whatsoever in the realm of social interaction, and that humans are blank slates, purely free agents, independent from all biological tendencies prior to the birth of the individual, that the individual is precisely a blank slate. That's the commonly held belief in official circles, but actually it's empirically wrong, and it's counterproductive and deluding to believe this. Yeah. Also, the utility of this document to talk in a book, for instance, or in a conference, to talk about one topic, not necessarily a conference, but in an expose, in a book, let us say, to talk about one topic without mentioning the other topics is false from a philosophical standpoint. It can be correct and accurate. I don't know, a book about economics can be accurate and correct from an economic standpoint, but it's false philosophically because it is abstract. And here, the philosophical perspective is the truth is the whole, and to talk just about one topic without interconnecting with all the others, or most of the others, precisely it is lacking philosophically, because it is abstract in the negative sense, in the sense of lack of completeness. What is not said is often as important as what is said. I mean, to talk about politics without talking about intelligence, anthropology, or demographics, it's false, even if what is said might be accurate or correct, but it's false in the sense that it's completely abstract. Yeah, that's why I wrote. That's why most of what is said by modern public figures in the West is false precisely, or irrelevant precisely for this reason, because it is abstract. Talking about politics and just politics without talking about sociology, the economy, psychology, anthropology, etc., it's false from a philosophical standpoint, even though or although what is said might be accurate or correct. Yeah, but of course it's not possible to constantly talk about everything, but at least to mention in an expose, in a book, it's not in oral speech when speaking through the spoken word, it's not possible to talk about everything constantly, but in a book, most topics ought to be mentioned, at least to give context, yeah, to contextualize what is being said. Yeah. And I wrote about absolute spirit here in blue, so art, religion, and philosophy. These are the highest expression of human consciousness, and they are key to understanding the totality. So this document, it seems very simple in a way. It is simplified. It's not simple, it's simplified. But my view is that philosophy, religion, and art are the most the highest expression of spirit. So these are keys to understand the totality, not only of the social world, but the natural world as well. Yeah, philosophy is religion expressed differently, and art as well in a way. And they give tools when it comes to art or religion, for instance, in a very simplified way, but the movies or the books which are published or which appear, they reveal, in a way, they manifest an aspect of the consciousness of a society. Yeah, the movies, the songs, the books which come out, which are being published or produced, they reveal a truth, in a way, a higher form of truth about a society than what I don't know, sociological data might give sometimes. Yeah, that's why watching movies can be a great way to come to know a society or an era. Listening to pop music as well, it can give great insights to see the full picture, because art is an expression of the totality of a society, and it mirrors back the whole in a way. Yeah. Okay. Now, fourth document. Okay. So here is my view of ethics. So, in a way, the category household management of the previous document, if it were subdivided and more fully expressed, it would look like this precisely. And here the logical structure, that's the same as the previous one, from subjective to objective spirit in a way, so from the soul to the spirit, and even the natural determination, I mean the body, the soul, and the spirit. I have already commented this document, but if I had to simplify, that's a process of evolution, growth, individuation, and there is interrelatedness at all levels. The person is the soul, that's a way of talking. The person is the soul interacting with other persons. So the body is the realm of natural determinations. The soul and the person would be psychological in the broadest sense, and the individual and the citizen would be social interactions. Yeah, so the transition between the person and the individual would be the transition between mostly individual psychology towards more social interactions and sociological interactions. Yeah. And the spirit encompasses the totality, and the purpose for man is to grow to become an ethical agent, a spiritual being, a fully developed, like the seed with the roots, the trunk, the branches, the flowers, etc. The fruit would be liberty. So this is a map of ethics, a guideline. I wrote, as I envision this, ethics is partly, in a way, distinct from morality. Here, briefly defined, one can behave ethically without being good or nice, as is commonly understood, because here morality would be more psychological, whereas ethics would be more objective. As I envision this, ethics means to lead a life according to a set of principles and to try to actualize these principles. And to take an example, the mafia, the Italian mafia in America, for instance, in the movies by Coppola or Scorsese, or can be envisioned as a form of ethical behavior without moral behavior. That's a great example. The mobsters, in a way, the wise guys, they are, as they are depicted in mafia movies, they behave ethically, but they are not very moral. So you can be ethical without being moral, and in a way you can be moral in the sense of being a nice person. That's not the sense of morality philosophically, but you can be a very decent, nice person without being ethical. If you are spontaneously a good-hearted, a kind person, you can be considered to be moral because you offer comforting words to others, you are dedicated for others, etc. Without being ethical in a sense, you can be spontaneously good without being rationally motivated by attempting to lead a life of principles. So yeah, it can be envisioned that someone might be ethical without being moral, and someone can be envisioned to be moral in a sense of being good, in an ordinary sense, without being ethical. But eventually the ideal is to be both moral, namely to be a good person, while behaving ethically, namely while having a principled lifestyle, in a way. So this document just shows a formal aspect. All the moments have to be interconnected, and the contents, I mean, what has to be done, it can be found on the internet, in books, etc., etc. I will briefly show some pieces of advice, but actually, because then it has to be adapted to each particular context, etc. But if I had to simplify, take care of your health. It includes all the categories around the body. Try to become a moral person. It means psychological growth, having a healthy lifestyle, practicing introspection, and giving up on most or all vices and addictions, and to try to act morally. Here means to train the will to do good deeds, try to develop skills, personal and interpersonal skills, knowledge, know-how, social skills, etc., to be a mature and an interesting and a competent person. Try to develop as an individual, to become a competent individual, to be able to take care of yourself, not to be dependent onto others, to be able eventually to take care of others, to be responsible, to think forward, to have a disciplined life, etc., etc. To be a good citizen means to participate in the life of the civic community. We live in a global village, so people indirectly or unconsciously, they participate in the life of the global community, but people, they live in a body which is limited in space. Most people, they are sedentary, so they live in a given community where they have to perform certain roles and certain duties, etc. They belong to a specific culture, etc. So to be a good citizen means to contribute to the independence, the well-being, the thriving of your local community. And to do all this enables you to gain in autonomy, independence, and eventually to reach wisdom and self-realization, and to become free as an individual member of a collective. Yeah, that's the goal. I wrote, ethics has to be applied. Theorizing about ethics, I wouldn't say that it's a waste of time, it's not, but everything relevant almost has already been said. Kant has already formalized ethics. Jesus, Batman, and Kant, these are three forms of the same ethical standards of behavior, one might say. Kant, that's in the realm of philosophy, Jesus, that's in the realm of religion, and Batman, that's in the realm of pop culture, one might say. But from a formal philosophical standpoint, Kant said most of what could be said in terms of intelligence, rigor, systematicity, etc. Kantian ethics has been criticized because there are problems, because it's sometimes impractical, it's very difficult, it's very demanding, etc. Nietzsche was very critical of Kant, but he promoted a new set of ethical values as well. Ethics is not a doctrine which has to be studied theoretically only, it has to be applied. It is in the concept of ethics or morality that it has to be performed, to be actualized, to be made wirklich in a way. But if I had to simplify, the motto of Kant is act only on that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Formulated differently, that's how I envision this. Kantian ethics means to act on an individual level, because that's the level at which individuals act, to act while obeying a principle which you would like to see be universalized. So it is not the individual action which ought to be made universal, but the principle which guides the action. That's UPS, I will show this later, but one can say that when you act while following a principle that you would want to be adopted by every thinking rational agent, then you are behaving ethically. And about pieces of advice, I will show a few other documents. Okay, these are examples of good pieces of advice. Giving up on most or all of these things, or practicing the good pieces of advice, doing all of this or most of this consistently, it's already a great step towards improving oneself individually, psychologically, in terms of health. It can do a whole lot of good to the individual, to the society. It requires a little bit of effort. It demands and requires discipline, perseverance, character, etc. But it's great because it enables to be healthier, to save a lot of money. That's a good start to practice most or all these things. And another couple of pieces of advice. Okay, here are other good pieces of advice about household management and civic virtue. Yeah, doing all these things consistently helps you become a better person and live in a healthier community on a local and also on a global level. Yeah, I could make other, there are probably many other great pieces of advice, but this was the best that I've been able to gather in a short, very short amount of space. Yeah. Okay, this is how I envision the movement of ideas in the 21st century in the Western world, predominantly in the United States of America, because this is where most of the interesting knowledge comes from, but not only in the US, of course, in most Western countries. This is how I envision the circulation of ideas, the movement of spirit, in a way. So I have tried to make the document as complete as possible with a very limited amount of space, like the previous documents. There were a lot of categories to put. It can be greatly improved, it can be modified like the previous ones, but given the circumstances, this is the best that I've been able to produce. As of now, as I'm recording this, I will continue to improve. The structure of the document, from bottom up, it's the same logical structure as the document about spirit, namely from subjective to absolute spirits. Most of the categories from sociobiology, demographics, anthropology, up towards art, religion, philosophy, they are the same as on the document about spirit. And from a left to right perspective, I wrote, if there is one side, there has to be at least two sides. That's relativity, not the theory of Einstein, but relativity in a sense of there are relations in logic, that's the realm of essence. Each determination only exists in relation to the other. In logic, that's the positive and the negative, or the ground and existence, etc., etc. It is by that which you are not that you yourself are defined. So this document intends to show a full view, namely both sides. If we envision this with both sides, there are both sides in a simplified way on most topics. Yeah. So I wrote how to not read the document. It doesn't mean that all the categories on the right go together, or that all the categories on the left go together. It's not bottom up on the left and bottom up on the right. All the categories on one side do not necessarily go with all the other categories on the same side. There are many contradictions, and yeah, that's not how it is supposed to be read. For instance, in anthropology, female are on the left side and male on the right side. It doesn't mean that there are only women on the left and only males on the right. That's not how it's supposed to be understood. But it is true that there are affinities usually between the categories on, for instance, subjective spirit and objective spirit, which are found on the left, and those which are found on the right. There are affinities, there are trends, tendencies. It might be quantified through polls or studies or interviews, etc., but it is not how it is supposed to be read. There is a logical order from bottom up in the center, from subjective, objective to absolute spirit. There is a logical order, relativity in a way, from left to right on each singular topic. For instance, in economics, usually free market, they are more on the right. Here I put the protectionist on the right, although strictly speaking it is supposed to be a leftist ideology, but in the modern world, from an empirical standpoint, usually there are populist leaders on the right who advocate protectionism. So here that's an example of a contradiction. It's not because my thoughts are not clear, it's simply because there really are contradictions among right wing. If we envision this as from a political standpoint, there are people on the right, there are the free traders, and there are those who are seeking for more protectionism. Like on the left, there are those who want more protection, and there are those who are in favor of global free market as well. So it's a simplified view. I will not comment thoroughly the document in this video, but there are contradictions or contrasts at all layers, even or especially within the same side. But here, just in the realm of economics, if there are people who are in the favor of free markets, wherever there might be, there has to be people who are in favor of less free markets. So that's why there is positive and negative. Here it doesn't mean good or bad, it simply means one determination only exists in relation to its other. In terms of budget, if there are people who are in favor of low taxes, it means that there are those who are in favor of high taxes. Those who want more welfare state and those who want less welfare state, etc. In the realm of intelligence, if there is a type of intelligence which is more analytical, there has to be one which is more synthetical, or that which we call intuitive. So it doesn't mean, this document doesn't mean that if certain people find themselves on the left or right side of the document on a certain topic, that they are necessarily on the same side for all other determinations, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it is politicized. For instance, anthropology, male and female, this is not politicized. It can become politicized through ideologies, but males are not inherently more of a specific determination. I mean, in certain cases it's the case, but in not all of them. Yeah. So also I wrote, for instance, in the realm of sociology. So this is predominantly for Western societies in the 21st century. Most categories, but especially sociology, it's predominantly the modern West. I wrote for immigrants which are not assimilated on a cultural level. Here there would be among the category immigrants on the left divide of the sociology aspect. Within their own paradigm, their own cultural paradigm, they can often be considered to be found in many aspects on the categories on the right. For instance, patriarchy, that's in family, patriarchy, tribalism, that would be in the realm of consciousness, a tribal consciousness, authority, that's partly hierarchical as well, or in the realm of, I think, education, maybe, no, law and order, yeah, authority, hierarchical, tribal, patriarchy, traditional, etc. These categories, they are found on the right of this document, and the non-assimilated immigrants, that's an example of a group of sociological group which is found here on the left side and often politically on the left, but actually within their own paradigm, they are often much more on the right than most native Westerners on the right, one might say. The reason why they are on the left is simply because white leftists side with them most of the time, and this paradigm is for predominantly modern Western societies, which are still demographically, they are still predominantly white, most of them or all of them, and there are double standards within Western societies set by the white liberal elite for whites and non-whites within Western societies. For instance, in the realm of religion, when the religion is the religion of the native Westerners, often traditional Christianity, it is often downgraded by the liberal elites of the left. But when it is the religion of immigrants, whether these are Hispanics or Muslims in Western Europe, they are protected by the left. So another example, the feminists, often they are found on the left politically, but also on the left of this document. There are right-wing branches of feminism, but in this paradigm, the white liberal feminists, they are often on the same side, if you envision this as sides, with some radical Muslim communities, but it's not because they agree, it's simply because the liberal feminists, they find themselves in opposition to the traditional value of the natives of Western society, of which they belong anthropologically, but they disagree with on political or religious or cultural aspects. So they usually side with groups which are less assimilated or which are not integrated culturally or economically within society, but there is no other unifying trend, basically. But sometimes we also find, in the case of Western Europe, we find right-wingers, native right-wingers, who side with Islam against the modern decadence of liberalism, etc., etc. So I will not thoroughly comment in this video, but it's a very simplified view, but actually there are infinite levels of complexity because there are mixtures of all sorts, of ideas of all sorts on both sides. So, a brief commentary of the document. It is partly empirical in a sense that it relates to the situation in the West in the early 21st century mostly, but it's also partly trans-historical, metaphysical, one might say, in a poor meaning, but partly. And as such, it is universal in a sense that the sociology, for instance, the entrepreneurs, the rednecks, that's white working class, but there was not enough room to write white working class. So the entrepreneurs, the middle class, the rednecks, the westernized immigrants, the rural population, etc., versus, that's a sociological divide in modern Western societies, versus the elites, the underclass, the civil servants, the immigrants which are not westernized, the highly educated people, and the city dwellers. It's empirically, this is the case in a lot of modern Western society, and in a sense, it cannot be rigorously universalized. In a country like Japan, it doesn't work because they do not. They have very low level of immigration. In other countries which are not as urbanized as developed countries, it doesn't work either, etc. But for a lot of other categories, in realm of intelligence, for instance, emotional versus IQ, intuitive versus analytical, it's universal in a sense that these are universal determination of the mind, in a way, and the psyche. Competition versus cooperation in anthropology, that's a universal divide. K versus R strategy, or in-group versus out-group, these are universals in anthropology or sociobiology. Yeah. I wrote about UPS, universal, particular, singular. Universal would be, it is partly, it's not universalizable as such, but it's that there is a universal aspect, namely it is partly valid for all human societies. I mean, in all societies there are at least two sides on every major topic of knowledge, one might say. The particular would be the modern West, and as such it applies rather faithfully to most, if not all, modern Western societies, and the singular would be the US, because this is where the knowledge is the most, where it is made available the most, and where this is why it applies the most, but I know empirically that it's also the case for England, partly Canada, France, Germany, etc., etc. But because knowledge is much more often produced in the US, it's much more easy to become conscious of this in the US, but eventually it's for the entire West and for the whole world when it is true. Yeah. I wrote, the particular means that it's also significantly valid for the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, etc., etc. So, the general movement of ideas, of intelligent, relevant ideas, tends to be, in the 21st century, from the left. Here it doesn't mean the political left, although it partly does as well, but the left side of the document to the right side, thanks to alternative sources of information. The inherited paradigm, inherited from school, the universities, the mainstream media, politics, mainstream intellectuals, corporations, churches, the entertainment industry, the mainstream culture, etc. So the inherited paradigm is overwhelmingly on most topics on the left, Therefore, those who break off from the conditioning, who switch to a different paradigm, they tend overwhelmingly to switch towards the right. Not necessarily the political right, but towards ideas which are found on the right of this document. I have to put an emphasis on movement. What is important? Of course, the ideas that individuals have are important, but the movement of acquiring these ideas, the movement of consciousness, the shift in consciousness is very important as well. So there are several layers of reading. I will not thoroughly comment, but it can be a tool which helps understand a lot. But each category can be envisioned as turning into its opposite eventually. That's dialectics. I take an example. In law and order, usually right-wingers, they are more in favor of authority and discipline, whereas on the left, they are more in favor of tolerance. But precisely if there is collective discipline in a society, paradoxically, it leaves room for more tolerance because there is trust that others will behave decently, so there is more willingness to tolerate behaviors in others if there is an underlying assumption that everyone is disciplined. And the left, they tend to be in favor of tolerance, accepting all sorts of behavior, but the counterpart is that they are very restrictive through restriction of behavior, speech, restriction in the market, a lot of regulations, etc. So the left, they succeed or not so, but in uniting a tolerance for all sorts of behavior while being very controlling on many aspects. Yeah. In the realm of morality, I put Stoicism on the right. That would be to accept events as they occur without complaining too much. And a pragmatic view of morality would consist in doing what works, to judge an action by the effects that it brings about, whether or not it's efficient. Usually that's the classical American view, very pragmatic. The Anglo-Saxon view at large, to be focused on the results, not too much thinking. Yeah. On the left, hedonism would be, in a way, a form of pragmatism, namely what is often considered good on the left is that which enables to increase satisfaction, happiness for the greatest number, etc. So that would be Stuart Mill in a way. Hedonism, I could have put utilitarianism. That's what I meant by hedonism. But also leftists, they tend to be universalists sometimes. These are not the same leftists, or not at the same time, but they tend to have a Kantian view, namely to act according to principles. And Kantian morality is a form of Stoicism in a way, and utilitarianism, or hedonism in a sense, is a form of pragmaticism. So that's why, of course, there is a left-wing and a right-wing view of morality, but in certain aspects, the view, they coincide. In the realm of consciousness, tribal consciousness tends to be thought of as being on the right, kind of a tribalistic country, nation first, etc. That's what the left criticizes about the right, but actually leftists, they can be very tribal, not necessarily based on kinship of blood, but they can have their ideological tribes, namely what is called moral communities. And the left is often associated with a cosmopolitan, universalist worldview, but actually the libertarians, for instance, who are often on the right, or highly refined, highly educated people, usually they are on the left, but there are highly educated people on the right, they can have a cosmopolitan view as well. And the libertarians, they are an example, or the big capitalist entrepreneurs, or not necessarily big, but the capitalist entrepreneurs, usually they have a tendency to have a cosmopolitan view. So that's an example of how a category can turn into its opposite. In the realm of psychology, there are resentful people on the right, and there are arrogant people on the left. There are cynical people on the left, although usually cynicism is on the right. There are cynical people on the left, and there are altruistic people on the right, etc., etc. So it's not. It's a simplification, obviously, but I wrote there are contradictions on both sides. For instance, protectionism versus free trade on the right. This is a contradiction. The rednecks and the middle class on the right, they have sometimes conflicting economic interests. Like on the left, the highly educated, living in cities, they can have conflicting interests with the underclass. There are contradictions on both sides, or on most, or not all, but most layers. In the realm of anthropology, cooperation versus competition, usually right-wingers, they are thought to be more not competitive, but more in favor of competition, while leftists, they are more prone to promoting cooperation. But capitalism, the free market, is a form of cooperation because it presupposes the division of labor, peaceful interactions, willing exchange, people willingly cooperating between agents, signing contracts, etc., etc. So it's a form of cooperation. And leftists, when they do politics, very often it's a fierce competition for power, status, and so it's a lot more subtle than a simple categorization. But of course, reality is infinitely complex, and in order to be made more intelligible, like a map, it has to be simplified. And I wrote, this document is very helpful to understand the times in which we live. I wrote, it contains both ontology and epistemology. Ontology, very simply defined here, means how reality is structured, namely how the objective world is, but also epistemology, here in a sense, how consciousness evolves, namely how people come to understand reality and to understand themselves. For instance, in the realm of sociology, there is an objective sociological reality with people who have certain views, either in terms of culture, politics, morality, budget, etc., depending on where they stand in the sociological order. So that would be the ontological reality, namely how society is structured from a sociological standpoint or from a cultural standpoint, and then how people relate to their own position in the world and how they, the level of consciousness that they have. So there is both the ontological aspect, the objective aspect, and the subjective aspect, namely the knowledge. There is reality and the mind, the consciousness, coming to understand reality. But the trend, if I had to simplify, is a switch from the left to the right on most topics, basically. And those who come from a left wing, not necessarily politically, but from most aspects on the left, namely the inherited paradigm, as I call this, and who switch towards the right step by step on most topics, consciously or unconsciously, they tend to have spiritual experiences. In the case of religion, paganism, Protestantism, because precisely this document simplifies and shows the view of the movement of spirit, which in its movement brings about knowledge in the form of books, conferences, articles, documents, videos, etc., etc. About science, I wrote, is it a scientific document? Can it make predictions? Can it be improved and or falsified? I'm tempted to say yes. In a way, it respects the scientific method because it's the result of observation. The scientific method means to observe, to build a theoretical model, and then to experiment. I have observed the world for a very long time. I have built, this is a theoretical model of the movement of consciousness, in a way, in the modern 21st century West. And the experiment, in order to be validated, the prediction, in a way, is that there is a trend, a switch towards the topic on the right. And I have not checked in a really rigorously scientific perspective, but just looking at the news, listening to videos, reading good books, it shows that this is the trend, in a way. The books being published, the think tanks, the videos, the conferences, the lectures, the public speech, it can be noticed that there is a switch towards the right, precisely because the establishment is predominantly on the left and society is kind of declining. Well, I can make a prediction. The idea of liberty that I have tried to systematize in the previous document about ethics will become more and more valuable. That's why institutes like the Mises Institute or the Ron Paul Institute, libertarianism in the broad sense, will become more and more valuable, at least to some people, because precisely Western societies are seriously decaying and declining, and liberty, in a way, it's a goal worthy of being sought and pursued in itself, but it's also the tools which enable to fix all the problems, one might say. So yeah. So the idea of liberty will continue to attract more and more people. I make this prediction. I could make many other predictions, but that's not the purpose in this video. But the overall, to understand the times in which we live, simplified, there is a movement of consciousness in the entire Western world, but since everything is interconnected, it impacts the whole world, but towards ideas on the right. And a philosophical perspective consists in understanding that both sides are connected, that each category presupposes its opposite. That's a dialectical view. About spirituality, like I said, people who go through most stages, especially those who come from a leftist background, this has been my case, have spiritual experiences precisely because they have the full view. Those who explore unconsciously and then consciously most or all the aspects, they tend to become spiritual because they have the full view, because they know both sides. Those who remain trapped only in a one-sided fashion, whatever the side might be, whether they are on the left or on the right or on whatever topic, those who do not move, it can be good if they have really found a great idea and they remain true to this idea. That's good, of course, but first, you are not sure that the idea that you have is good if you do not explore other ideas. But then those who travel, they extend and expand their intellectual horizons, and they mature and they acquire knowledge. And yeah, so that's it's not ambiguity, that's the subtlety about being consistent. It's good, of course, it's good to be consistent, but without being rigid. To be rigid, you need to have a fixed position and not to change. If it's rigidity and not consistency, it's not good. If you change constantly your worldview, your mindset, etc., without being consistent, that's just frivolity or incoherence. So it's not good either. So the ideal of a spiritual life is to change in a way constantly, because change means progress, evolution, development, growth, improvement, while remaining true to a certain set of underlying assumption or underlying idea, to remain, to constantly change while constantly remaining the same. That can be envisioned as a definition of spirituality as I envision this, namely to move, to explore, to travel intellectually, while remaining consistent nonetheless. Yeah. And also I wrote, basically, I'm just a religious person who talks scientifically. I'm just a religious person, but I talk about science and philosophy. I wrote, in this sense, I'm just like Hegel, but what I talk about, what I've been talking about for more than 2 hours now almost 2 hours, is, it's religion. Religion is the to be in connection with the essence, the principle, the cause of the world, of reality. But I'm a religious person who talks about the world and about spirit and about God, but in a scientific way. But actually, I'm just a religious. And I wrote, these documents, to conclude, these documents, they are worth more than their weight in gold. They are worth their weight in gold, but actually even more, because they share and they convey an enormous amount of, I think, intelligent information, overwhelmingly, in a very limited amount of space. So, given the circumstances of my own personal development as an individual, namely, I will not comment, but the limitations that I've had, the circumstances that I've had to encounter, plus the limitations of space, trying to put the greatest amount of information in the shortest amount of space, it's okay. Yeah, it's okay what I've produced in terms of, given the circumstances, yeah. This is the best that I've been able to produce, given the circumstances at this moment in time. I can greatly improve, and I intend to keep doing so, but yeah. Okay, I will conclude with this document. which has helped me a lot and continues to help me. A full view of ethics, and in order to attain liberty, there has to be a lot of efforts produced at all layers. So the documents that I've been sharing, they could be classified in either education or information or both, or culture maybe, or wisdom, who knows. Yeah. Or work as well. This is my work. Yeah. So that's what I could say. I will conclude with the man in charge, maybe.